Widespread anti-COVID lockdown protests have sprung up in China, and the Biden administration reacted by not reacting. Now it's American voters' chance to react. First, I want to thank Jack Posobiec and his Human Events show for sponsoring this incredibly newsworthy set of questions. The link to the crosstabs is in the description, and it's open to everybody. So what do voters think? Let's start with their reviews on how Biden is handling issues related to China. 10% say excellent, and a combined 31% say good or excellent. 63% say fair or poor. And that is just a horrible rating on this issue and among Biden's lowest issues. Here are the party breakdowns. Republicans are very unified in just trashing Biden, and the independent numbers are almost as close, with 55% saying poor and only 23% saying excellent or good. Democrats aren't exactly trashing Biden, but with only a 16% excellent rating, they really aren't giving him glowing reviews either. For context, remember that a strong majority of all voters think it's likely that Biden knew about and personally profited from his son Hunter's business deals with companies in China. People in China have recently staged large public protests against their government's COVID-19 policies. Do you approve or disapprove of the protests in China? 76% of voters approve, with a majority, 53%, strongly approving. Only 5% strongly disapprove. 81% of Republicans approve, but also 72% of independents and even 75% of Democrats, showing nearly complete bipartisan agreement. Democrats are least likely to strongly approve, but they aren't at all more likely to disapprove. You rarely get such high numbers of voters agreeing with anything, especially with the party numbers this close. And with how many voters strongly agree with the protests in China and major corporations and prominent politicians distancing themselves, the absence of conscience here is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Pretty much every demographic approves of the protests. But who approves of them least? 18 to 39-year-olds, but still 65% of them approve. But it's funny because most of the protesters in China are probably 18 to 39-year-olds. Protesters in China have called for the resignation of their country's president, Xi Jinping. Should the US government support those calling for the Chinese president to resign? 42% say yes, and 27% say no, but 31% are not sure. So although a vast majority of voters support the idea of protesting draconian COVID measures, a majority of American voters are not ready to see the US get involved in supporting a regime change. What blew my mind here is, again, how absolutely bipartisan the results were. The biggest difference was, of course, among party, but the results weren't earth-shatteringly different. First, a little less than a third of each party is just totally not sure. Republicans are the only ones with whom a majority say the US should get involved, but it's still only 53%. 38% and 37% of Democrats and independents agree. This is really the only question I've seen where independents and Democrats exactly agree. Why don't you take a moment to post your theories on what these two questions mean to you in the comments? My off-the-cuff guess is that voters are highly supportive of the protests, but very untrusting of the US to get involved in any way that improves things overall. Lastly, is China an enemy or an ally of the US? 41% of voters say enemy, and only 8% say ally, which is really crazy considering how dependent we are on them for trade. But a combined 51% say not sure or somewhere in between. Now, we've asked this question before, and the results really haven't changed over time. Likewise, the crosstabs are so consistent across every demographic that they aren't worth making a chart for. 18 to 39-year-olds and high school dropouts are the most likely to see China as an ally, and Republicans, with 61%, are most likely to see China as an enemy. But I thought this point here was fascinating. Only 9% of Biden's strongest supporters say China is an ally, which is really low, but also only 23% of them say it's an enemy, leaving 68% who say in between or not sure. That's the absolute highest number of voters who want to turn a blind eye on China in any of the demos. And among those who strongly disapprove of Biden, 4% say China is an ally and 67% say China is an enemy. That, by almost 10 points, is the highest spread of people who say China is an ally versus an enemy. That, by almost 10 points, is the highest spread of people who say China is an enemy versus an ally. With the strongest signal for this question being buried in the crosstabs of Biden approval, I think it's fair to say that voters are telling us something about the relationship of Biden to China. Thanks again to Jack Posobiec and Human Events for sponsoring this poll. Jack is a great source to follow if you'd like to see news about China and other relevant topics. If you liked the video, please hit like, subscribe to our channel, and come follow us on Twitter to get the latest on all of our breaking polls. Thank you.